Forget everything you think you know about ancient history. For most of us, love, connection, and desire are the forces that drive procreation. For the Spartans, this most private human act was a chillingly public duty. It wasn't about passion. It was a state command, a biological obligation enforced by the government with one ruthless goal: to continuously forge the deadliest human weapons the ancient world would ever face. Spartans weren't merely raised as people. They were systematically built as soldiers. And their creation didn't begin on the battlefield. It started, cold and calculated, in the bedroom. Forget the romantic myth of the red cloaks and noble last stands. Behind the legend of the 300 lies a horrifying truth. A system of human engineering so severe it makes the darkest modern dystopias seem merciful. Make sure to subscribe to uncover more forgotten histories like this, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love seeing where our community is. At the core of this military machine was the absolute state control over reproduction. In Sparta, individual choice held no power when it came to love or forming a family. The government acted as the sole matchmaker, pairing citizens based on genetic strength, never sentiment. Elder magistrates, men hardened by decades of combat, examined young males like livestock, judging their height, stamina, and lineage. He was the tall, broad-shouldered warrior born of distinguished ancestors. She was a strong, fertile woman with wide hips and a sturdy frame. Beauty wasn't valued for vanity. It was a signal of optimal health, a promise of better blood. Marriages were strictly state-arranged. Cold, strategic unions engineered to produce superior offspring. Love was irrelevant. Personal desire was secondary. The physical body no longer belonged to the individual. It belonged entirely to Sparta. Every citizen's primary role was to strengthen the state through their bloodline. Women's roles were equally unfamiliar and distorted. They were never viewed simply as wives or mothers, but as vessels of the Spartan nation. Their inherent worth came solely from their ability to bear powerful, healthy children. From a very early age, Spartan girls trained rigorously, not for combat, but for the ordeal of childbirth and motherhood. They ran, wrestled, and threw javelins, conditioning their bodies specifically to carry warriors. Their personal will was insignificant. Their physical fitness was paramount. They were taught that their true battlefield was the birthing bed, and their greatest honor was to bring forth a future soldier for the state. But this system went further into realms that appear almost monstrous today. What happened when a celebrated warrior's wife failed to conceive, or when she delivered weak children? What if there was a woman of exceptional health married to an older, less impressive man elsewhere? Sparta had a shocking answer, a grim clause in its social code. It actively allowed, even encouraged, a strong warrior to father a child with another man's wife. This was not seen as adultery. It was a civic duty. A woman's womb could be loaned in service of the state, often with her own husband's full agreement. Producing a strong child, even by another man, was considered an honor to the household and to Sparta itself. Concepts like personal love or sexual fidelity were utterly crushed beneath the boots of state eugenics. The final goal wasn't happiness. It was the ruthless perfection of the bloodline. And so, when a Spartan child was finally born, it wasn't a time for celebration or joy. It was time for a test. The newborn wasn't placed into its mother's arms, but instantly taken to a grim place called the Gathering Hall. Awaiting them was the Gerousia, a group of aged warriors. They had witnessed countless battles and now looked upon life through the cold lens of death. They examined each infant without any emotion. Naked and trembling, the baby was inspected from head to toe. Its legs, its spine, its cry. Every flaw, every sign of inherent weakness could instantly seal its fate. To Spartan logic, this wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was a cold necessity. They were a small, elite warrior caste surrounded by enemies and enslaved helots who outnumbered them 10 to 1. In such a world, weakness meant profound danger, not just for one child, but for the entire state. A frail infant wasn't merely a burden. It was a tangible threat. Mercy today could easily mean destruction tomorrow. Sparta's creed was survival achieved through absolute strength. There were no exceptions. The council's decision was immediate and final. There was no appeal. If the baby passed the grim test, it was returned to its family, not as a son, but as a future soldier already belonging to the state. From the moment he drew his first breath, a Spartan child's destiny was already decided. But if the elders' judgment turned against him, if they ruled he was unfit for life, his fate was chilling. He wasn't slain by a sword or drowned in a river. His end came in a way far colder. The infant was carried to the barren slopes of Mount Taygetus to a place called the Apothetai, the deposits. There, in a dark cliff of stone, the newborn was left to the wind, the night frost, and the beasts. A quiet death, unseen and unspoken of. To Spartan logic, this was not murder. They believed they were merely returning to nature what nature had produced imperfectly, a grim offering to collective strength. Passing the elders' inspection was only the start. From that moment on, the child's life became a slow march toward war. And for his parents, duty did not end with birth. The state demanded more, the constant creation of new bodies to fuel its war machine. Procreation in Sparta wasn't a right or a privilege. It was an obligation. They practiced what we would later call eugenic centuries before the word existed. The belief that humankind could be perfected through selective breeding didn't originate in the laboratories of the 20th century. It was born right here in these rocky hills. For the Spartans, this wasn't driven by hate, but by ruthless practicality. Weakness had no place in their bloodline. To achieve this, the most private human act became a public duty. Love, as we understand it, had no place in the formula. Men lived from the age of 7 to 30 in communal barracks among their comrades. Husbands would sneak from their camp under cover of darkness to lie briefly with their wives, quietly, hurriedly, and then vanish before sunrise to avoid punishment. There was no household life, no time to nurture affection. The wife was often a stranger chosen for her body, not her heart. Their union had one solitary goal: conception. Once a child was expected, the man returned fully to his true family, the army. The entire system was built to crush personal attachment, to ensure devotion only to Sparta. Strong family bonds were viewed as potential betrayal. Romantic love was considered a dangerous distraction. And so, the state heavily punished those who refused to marry or reproduce. A man who stayed single beyond the required age was branded disloyal, a deserter of his civic duty. During certain festivals, these men were paraded naked through the freezing streets, forced to sing mocking songs about their failure. They were denied the honors granted to respected elders, treated as outcasts, living proof that private life in Sparta was everyone's business. The cost of this harsh ideology was immense. Compassion completely faded from daily life. Generation after generation was conditioned to believe that tenderness was a weakness, that one's body belonged not to the self, but to the state, and that motherhood was not an act of love but a mandatory service. Children didn't learn affection from their parents. They learned unwavering obedience from their trainers. Mothers handed their sons to the state at 7, whispering only, "Return with your shield or on it." That phrase wasn't empty pride. It was the endpoint of a culture that had utterly erased maternal love and replaced it with fanatic devotion to Sparta's glory. If reproduction was the forging and inspection the testing, then at 7 years old came the assembly, the true creation of the weapon. The state that engineered his birth now came to officially claim ownership. This was the start of the Agoge, pronounced $Agoge, the harshest and most effective training program ever devised by humankind. It was a system that ruthlessly shattered children and rebuilt them entirely in the image of the perfect warrior. Picture it. You're 7 years old, violently torn from the only warmth you've ever known. Your mother doesn't weep. She simply hands you over. From that moment, your new family is your age group, your training unit, your cold barracks. Your father becomes an instructor, not to teach reading or writing, but endurance. You won't live in a family home again until you are 30. By then, the word home will mean nothing to you. The first lesson of the Agoge was simple and merciless. Comfort is the enemy. The Spartan boy slept on a bed he had to make himself. Reeds ripped by hand from the banks of the Eurotas River. No knife allowed. His only clothing was a single rough tunic, the same garment for the burning summers and the freezing winters. And above everything else, he was always hungry. The rations were intentionally meager, a slow, calculated starvation planned with mathematical precision. Yet this deprivation wasn't just cruelty. It was a fundamental strategy. The boys were explicitly ordered to make up the difference on their own, through theft. In Sparta, stealing wasn't a vice. It was a compulsory lesson. It honed stealth, patience, and daring. A warrior who couldn't slip unseen into an enemy camp and steal food was utterly worthless. So, the boys learned to move like shadows through their own city, scavenging for scraps like wolves. But if you were caught, the punishment was merciless. You'd be flogged without pity, not for the act of theft itself, but for being foolish enough to get caught. The sin was incompetence, not the crime. The message was branded deep into the flesh. Success justifies everything. Failure has no excuse. On the battlefield, being caught meant death, not just for you, but for everyone beside you. The Agoge ensured that the lesson was never forgotten. This wasn't simply training soldiers. It was manufacturing predators. Fierce, sharp, calculating, stripped of ordinary morality. In their world, right and wrong dissolved into one question. Did you succeed or not? They learned to lie, to vanish, to read weakness, and to obey without hesitation. They were indeed brothers, but brothers bound by pain, rivalry, and fear. Starvation and theft were only the opening chapters. The next lessons were far darker, designed to break the child's mind before rebuilding it. The human body adapts quickly to hunger, cold, and blows. But the real war of the Agoge was waged inside the skull. Sparta didn't just need muscle. It needed minds honed to blades, spirits emptied of self, loyal only to the state. Having conquered the body, the instructors now targeted the soul. Their weapon was silence. Our word laconic, meaning brief in speech, comes from Laconia, the region of Sparta. That is no coincidence. Spartan children were taught that words were tools, not toys. Talking idly, making a foolish remark, or asking a pointless question was punishable. Teachers hurled complex questions meant to provoke sharp, precise answers. Hesitation or dullness was met not with words, but with pain. Sometimes the instructor would bite the offender's thumb. A small but unforgettable lesson in thinking before speaking. Silence became armor. Every single word had to strike like an arrow. Yet the worst cruelty didn't always come from their elders. Came from each other. The training pyramid guaranteed this. Older boys, called Irenes, ruled the younger like tyrants, commanders, jailers, and tormentors all in one. At meals, they launched verbal ambushes. Who is the bravest man in Sparta? What do you think of the king's last campaign? Is theft honorable? There were no right answers, only traps. A stumble, a pause, the wrong tone. All invited ridicule or blows. Humiliation was public, constant, and deliberate. This was not random bullying. It was institutionalized cruelty, a state-designed system to forge minds that could stay cold under interrogation and chaos. Each child learned to think like a politician and fight like a beast, walking a minefield of words and glances where one mistake meant pain or exile. Rivalry was fuel. Aggression earned respect. Trust no one. Expose others' weaknesses. Hide your own. These were the commandments. It was the law of the pack, supervised by the state itself. All this daily brutality led to one of the most horrifying rituals of all, the ceremony at the altar of Artemis Orthia. Artemis, goddess of the wild, protector of the home, demanded a bloody offering. Cheeses were placed upon her altar. The boys' task was simple in theory: run, seize them, escape. But to reach the altar, they had to sprint through a gauntlet of whips. Leather lashes sliced through the air, tearing flesh with every single step. It wasn't a contest of speed or reflexes. It was a test of one thing alone: how much agony a future Spartan could endure without breaking. The true test was never about stealing cheese. It was about standing silent under the whip, enduring agony without a single scream, a tear, or the faintest sign of weakness. To cry out was a deep disgrace. Plutarch himself described young Spartans dying at that altar, their faces set in smiles as their lifeblood soaked the ground, dying proud, having proven their worthiness. This was their grim graduation, the Agoge's final ceremony, a baptism by blood meant to purge every trace of fear and softness, forging men into living steel. But when a society deliberately burns away every human weakness, what fragments of humanity are left behind? What remains of the soul after it's been ruthlessly hammered into a weapon? What Sparta created was a chilling paradox. Men of unmatched physical strength yet emotionally hollow. Warriors of flawless discipline yet fundamentally warped morality. In their world, killing was honorable, and compassion was a fatal weakness. They were the perfect instruments of violence. And now, the state demanded absolute proof that they could serve its darkest, most secret needs. That proof came through something few dared to even mention: the crypteia. It wasn't a traditional military unit. It didn't fight information. It was something far more sinister: a covert death squad. A machine of fear designed to keep Sparta's internal enemies silent. To truly understand this, you must grasp Sparta's greatest, most crippling obsession: control. A small, elite warrior class ruled over an immense population of enslaved people called helots, who outnumbered them by a factor of up to 10 to 1. The Spartans lived in constant, paralyzing terror of a massive revolt. Their calculated answer was terror, preemptive and ruthless. Each year, a select group of elite graduates from the Agoge, the strongest, most cunning, and utterly ruthless, were sent into the countryside with only a dagger and a few scraps of food. They were ordered to hide by day, move by night, and kill without hesitation. Their prey? The helots. But not just any helots. Only the boldest, the most capable, those who dared to rise above the rest. These young men became the scythe that cut down any stalk taller than the field. This was their final exam, their last transformation. To murder an unarmed man under cover of darkness wasn't combat. It was psychological surgery. A brutal ritual meant to prove that every flicker of mercy had been permanently erased from their hearts. They were no longer killing out of rage or defense. They killed solely because the state told them it was a necessity. And to make this mass murder legal, the Spartan government performed a chilling ritual of its own. Each year, the ephors, Sparta's ruling magistrates, formally declared war on the helots. It was a bureaucratic act with monstrous implications. Once declared enemies, helots could be slaughtered without it counting as murder. The killers of the crypteia weren't criminals. They were soldiers carrying out the express will of the state. A convenient legal fiction that turned mass murder into a civic duty. By the time his dagger was stained with blood, the Spartan had completed his transformation. He had been born as a child of the state, shaped by discipline, stripped of emotion, and now proven capable of killing without hesitation. But what had he truly become? The defender of civilization or its most efficient predator? At the age of 30, he could finally leave the communal barracks. But his so-called freedom was a stark illusion. A new duty immediately awaited him: to reproduce, to raise the next generation of instruments for Sparta's war machine. The killer now had to become a father. His bride, chosen by the state, was not a submissive wife but his equal in strength and conviction. Spartan women were not the victims of the system. They were its very pillars. While boys endured the Agoge, girls entered their own specialized training regimen, one equally rigorous and ideologically charged. In a Greece where women were often confined to the home and silenced, Spartan women stood apart. They were educated, physically trained, and taught to manage property and estates. Why? Because Sparta's focus was never on comfort, but on breeding strength. Everything, every child, every law, every marriage, served one single purpose: to forge a race of perfect warriors. Even the philosopher Plato, observing from Athens, admired this system, believing it mirrored his vision of an ideal society. But he misunderstood it entirely. The aim wasn't equality. It was efficiency, reproductive precision. Spartan women were molded to suppress tenderness and replace it with fierce patriotism. Their worth was judged not by affection but by the caliber of warriors they gifted to the state. They became legends of cold discipline. A Spartan mother handing her son his shield before battle would command him, "Return with it or upon it." When news of defeat reached the city, other Greek mothers wept. Spartan mothers demanded to know only one thing: did we win? One famous tale tells of a woman who personally killed her own son for returning home in disgrace. They weren't passive bystanders. They were the ruthless guardians of Spartan ideology itself, with minds and bodies shaped by the state. Marriage in Sparta wasn't an act of love. It was an engineered ritual. The process resembled an abduction. The groom didn't court his bride. He seized her in the night. Her attendants shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and left her waiting in darkness on a bed of straw. He came secretly, fulfilled his duty quickly, and returned to the barracks before sunrise. This strange ceremony had a vital purpose. It ensured emotional detachment. It kept domestic affection from interfering with military loyalty. By making their meetings brief and secret, the state believed passion would remain high and conception more likely, without the distraction of love or comfort. It was the pinnacle of the Spartan system. Two products of indoctrination, male and female, joined in darkness, bound not by love but by decree. Their mission was singular: to reproduce strength. A perfect soldier paired with a perfect mother, the human assembly line of Sparta. Yet within this perfection lay a slow, silent poison. For 3 centuries, the machine worked flawlessly. Sparta dominated Greece, its warriors unmatched, its discipline legendary. But the flaw that would ultimately destroy it wasn't foreign. It was bred into the system itself. The first poison was demographic collapse. Sparta's ruthless eugenics, the abandonment of weak infants on Mount Taygetus, and the rejection of all imperfection created a disastrously narrow gene pool. Every single warrior lost in battle was an irreplaceable tragedy. The loss of decades of training and a carefully preserved bloodline. Other cities could raise new armies. Sparta could not replace 100 of its equals. Their greatest strength, their elite exclusivity, became their fatal weakness. They were breeding themselves out of existence. The second poison was inflexibility. The Agoge created impeccable soldiers, but not thinkers. Sparta produced warriors who could follow orders flawlessly but not innovate, not question. As warfare and tactics evolved, their rigid system remained frozen. They were perfect soldiers trapped in a world that demanded generals. When confronted by new tactics and creative minds, they found themselves fighting ghosts of their own past. And the final blow came with success itself. When Sparta triumphed over Athens in the Peloponnesian War, the floodgates opened. Persian silver and gold poured into their city. Wealth, the very thing Lycurgus had forbidden, instantly corroded their iron discipline. Land ownership became concentrated. Greed replaced austerity, and corruption seeped into every rank. Spartans, who once despised luxury, became enslaved by it. The true spirit of Sparta, built on equality and simplicity, began to rot from within. Then came Leuctra. On that fateful plain, Theban general Epaminondas shattered centuries of Spartan invincibility. Instead of spreading his forces thin, he concentrated his left wing 50 men deep and rammed it straight into the Spartan right, where the king and his royal guard stood. Innovation crushed rigidity. The unbreakable phalanx collapsed. For the first time in living memory, a Spartan king fell in battle, his army annihilated beside him. Sparta's power was broken. With hundreds of its finest men dead, the city's warrior caste was crippled beyond recovery. The empire that had terrified Greece for generations faded into irrelevance. By the Roman era, Sparta had become little more than a curiosity, a living museum where travelers came to watch reenactments of its brutal customs, echoes of a once great civilization. In the end, the tale of Spartan breeding practices is more than history. It's a profound warning. A people so obsessed with biological perfection that they sacrificed everything human to achieve it. They succeeded in creating the perfect warrior, and in doing so, sealed their own extinction. The machine that forged heroes eventually consumed itself, leaving behind nothing but ruins and the whisper of a greatness built on cruelty and undone by its own perfection. If you found this chilling history fascinating, we dive into the dark secrets of the ancient world every week. Click the link on your screen to see our deep dive into Rome's brutal slave markets. Don't forget to subscribe before you go.